Thousands of liters of oil still float atop the Red Deer River tonight, the result of a pipeline leak. It happened just north of Sundre. The company that owns the 50-year-old pipeline is scrambling to clean up the damage before it's too late. While environmentalists and many residents are pointing fingers, accusing oil companies of poor monitoring and the government of poor oversight. Chris Epp reports.
Nobody can see where the oil is coming from, but they all see where it's ending up.
It's a disaster all along the Red Deer River now, and there's not much they can do.
On Thursday, a pipeline here north of Sundre sprung a leak, sending up to 3,000 barrels of oil into the water. A bird's eye view shows patches of oil all along the Red Deer River. The company still doesn't know exactly where the breach occurred, but says the line was dormant at the time, so oil wasn't actually flowing through it. Still, the crude already sitting inside seeped into the water.
We deeply regret this incident, and we're obviously working to ensure that we're doing all we can to limit the extent of the release and the community and the environmental impacts.
A lot of the containment efforts are taking place here at the Dixon Dam. It's actually dozens of kilometers from where the spill actually occurred, but they need to stop the oil here before it gets into the Red Deer water supply.
At this point in time, we don't believe the release poses any potential threat to both water quality and or residents, and so we'll continue to monitor that situation. If the situation should change, of course, we would respond accordingly.
However, environmental activists say this breach never should have happened in the first place, and that companies and governments need to do a better job when it comes to oversight.
This is at a time that the federal and provincial government are seeking to streamline the approval of pipeline projects. Given the number of oil spills that we've had here in this province, given the impact that they're starting to have, definitely we shouldn't be streamlining the approval process.
The province says it will investigate the cause of the leak. So does the company that owns the pipeline. For now, however, all the focus is on cleaning it up.
And booms continue to be placed at the Glenipher Reservoir to prevent oil from getting into local water supplies. That's where Chris Epp joins us. And Chris, there is some controversy about how the leak was discovered.
Yeah, originally we'd heard that a monitoring group made up of volunteers and civilians in Sundre had noticed the oil slick and contacted the company. The company tells us they also knew about the leak, discovered it on their own at around the same time, and that the, quote, third party, as they say, this independent group, just verified the information they already have. Now, as we mentioned, they still don't know exactly where that leak is, but also say that it's a good thing the pipe wasn't actually, oil wasn't flowing through there at the time, because the damage could have been a lot worse.
It could be weeks or even months before an oil spill near Sundre is cleaned up. As Stephanie Brennan tells us, the pressure is on to stop the environmental impact.
If you just give me 60 seconds,
no, you can't.
We can be out of your
No,
hair.
right away here.
No, I'm sorry, sir.
I'm gonna go call the RCMP.
The security around the area is tight as crews have detected where the leak happened. Plains Midstream Canada has set up 2 containment points to stop the oil from running downstream, but the oil within the containment zone is evident. They are in the process of plugging the pipeline in order to stop the leak so they can start repairs. The leak was detected Thursday night, and it is estimated 3,000 barrels have leaked into the Red Deer River.
At this point, the booms are in place. The oil is not progressing any further downstream, and action is taking place to begin to recover the oil.
So far, there are no health concerns, but bottled water is being shipped in for people who use the Glenipher Lake as a water supply as a precautionary measure.
So just a couple hundred meters upstream from where we are right now, there are crews working on cleaning up the spill, but where we are right now, there's no one around. And as you can see, the oil is starting to pile up on the sides of the banks, and the smell of hydrogen sulfide is pretty strong in this area. So when they'll get here, we're not really quite sure.
It's a bit early to be able to forecast that with precision. We think by today we'll have another tranche of containment established, and we'll be able to switch our focus to the cleanup exercise. That'll allow us to more properly assess the impact and the extent of the spill, and from there we'll be able to develop those timelines better.
The company is working closely with a number of provincial agencies, including Alberta Environment, Sustainable Resources, and the Energy Resources Conservation Board.
The RCB is conducting a full investigation as to the cause of the release. and the results of that investigation will determine what kind of enforcement action will be required.
Plains Midstream expects the environmental impact to be minimal, and they will be able to fully clean up the site. Stephanie Brennan, CTV News, near Sundre.
Premier Alison Redford says she'll monitor the situation closely to ensure all the rules are followed and that a situation like this will be prevented in the future.
Crews from Plains Midstream Canada are working to contain and clean up the oil leak around Sundre. Despite the effort, the family at the center of the leak says all appears lost for their home. Bill McFarland reports.
Gord Johnston is no stranger to the oil industry. It paid for his family home. But since Thursday, he's watched as light sour crude poisoned the 57-acre property he calls home.
Things have to change.
His children and grandchildren have spent countless hours swimming, boating, and fishing here. But up to 480,000 liters of oil has changed all that.
I believe my property is done. This stuff is full of all kinds of toxins and carcinogens, and
the oil now coats the grass and brush throughout his property, swirls and eddies in even the small streams. An iridescent sheen spreads out from the gravel banks.
But where are the animals going to drink? There's no fresh water here.
It all spells death to the countless creatures that call this area home. Between powerful fumes and poisoned water, Johnston fears the worst.
How do the deer and the moose, the wild elk, like the ducks, the geese landing in that, they're done.
Johnston himself was nearly done. Dazed and sick from sour gas mixed in with the crude, his wife Bonnie found him Friday morning and rushed him to hospital. He's out now, and crews from the company responsible for the 46-year-old pipeline have started to clean up the Johnston property.
Would have been nice to know you're coming. I'm glad you're concerned enough to let me know.
A welcome start, but Johnston says ultimately spills need to be prevented in the first place. Many companies take environmental risks seriously.
And they do what they say they do, because I've worked around them. But other ones, you have to push them, and they will not do unless they're pushed, pulled, prodded, and threatened.
Bill McFarland, CTV News, Sundre.
The company says it's still not sure why the pipeline ruptured, but it believes most of the oil is contained and cleanup is underway. Officials don't know how many animals have or will die as a result, and they can't put a timeline on how long it'll take to clean up. A spokesperson for Alberta Environment says it's hard to tell what the long-term effects will be. The man who discovered the spill says his 57-acre property is destroyed.
What I saw was a hell of a mess, to put it mildly. I saw a river system that's basically, the ecosystem of it has been destroyed. I saw dead backwaters where there's no life in it, where they should be teeming with small fish and frogs and salamanders and insects and birds, where there's nothing, where the air's quiet.
A company spokesperson says they'll take care of landowners, but they would not talk about financial compensation.
Oil is still clinging to plants and rocks along the Red Deer River tonight as the company behind a leaking pipeline continues to clean up the mess. These crews are getting a close look at one oil-slicked area they first spotted from the air. Plains Midstream Canada, the company that owns the pipeline that ruptured Thursday, says it's monitoring the damage and working hard to mop up the oil. Between 3,000 and 5,000 barrels of oil are believed to have entered the river. Residents say they hope the damage can be undone, and they feel it's a black mark for an industry that has helped the area prosper.
I mean, most of us around here have lived with the oil industry. We've benefited from it, and most people derive revenue from it, so it's pretty upsetting to see it. But accidents will happen, and there is risk in any business.
Chris Epp joins us from the Red Deer River tonight. And Chris, we are still waiting to hear just how this cleanup is progressing.
The company didn't offer any updates today on the status of the cleanup, but they are promising to do that sometime on Tuesday afternoon. And there are still several questions for them that don't have answers. A lot of people want to know exactly where did this breach occur along the pipeline. The company knows the area, but not exactly where. And still the figures about how much oil leaked into the water are somewhat ambiguous, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 barrels. But people are also saying, well, we want to know exactly how much. And finally, what could be the biggest question people have is how long before all this oil is actually cleaned up and out of the water system.
Okay, Chris Epp, Sundre, thank you. The river and plants are a big concern, but there is also the potential for a number of animals to come in contact with the oil close to their water supply. So Alberta Fish and Wildlife have asked a nearby wildlife centre to be on standby, and already a baby beaver has needed help. Kevin Fleming reports.
A lodge. I know.
He's tiny and fragile, only about a week old. And when people cleaning up spilled oil near Jackson Creek found this baby beaver, he was covered in oil and needed help.
We had to get it off really quickly because these are animals that preen a lot. So if he was preening, he would get it all inside his system. He got chiropactic to begin with too, to flush anything out of his system.
Now that he's clean outside and inside, it's time to eat, and he's hungry. Staff and volunteers at the Medicine River Wildlife Centre are preparing to see more oil-covered animals. They say it's important to work quickly.
He was stressed. I mean, it's the stress of capture and, you know, the stress of what just happened.
But that stress is easing now for this baby beaver who's doing well.
Okay, let me get you some more.
It's hoped he can be returned to his parents as soon as the lodge is located.
They're programmed just to lie very, very still. Because
in another room is a fawn, just weeks old, found stuck in the banks of the creek, covered in mud.
By running your hands over him, looking at the color of his fur, everything, his fur is soft and normal. There's nothing wrong with him at all. And like I say, then there's no smell of oil on your hands afterwards either, and my hands aren't greasy.
The fawn was cleaned and will soon be returned to its mother, but for now is being kept warm and safe.
It's a homeopathic treatment that we would go in and just give him orally, and that helps to keep him calm and reduces stress.
Staff and volunteers at the Medicine River Wildlife Centre say they have no idea how many animals will be impacted by this oil spill, but they do say they'll be able to provide help for whatever animal comes through its doors. Kevin Fleming, CTV News, west of Innisfail.
Now, if you see an animal in obvious distress, experts say you should put a blanket or towel around it, put it in a box, and call the Wildlife Centre. The Medicine River facility can be reached at 403-728-3467. Dozens of workers are on the Red Deer River again today, trying to clean up the residue from an oil spill last week. The company says the crude has now been contained, but many are asking what they're doing about the people and the wildlife that live there. Chris Epp reports.
11 cleanup crews and nearly 200 people are on the job, but oil still dots the banks of the Red Deer River.
So there are only a relatively small number of isolated pockets, I believe around 25 isolated pockets along the river shoreline, if you will, that we've been able to develop, that we've been able to isolate, identify, and develop specific plans to clean each of those up.
Plains Midstream Canada, which owns the pipeline, still hasn't been able to find out exactly where the pipe broke. Until they do, the line will remain shut down. Crews have been trying to clean up the spill since Thursday's breach, but their work has been slowed by the weather.
But it's been rainy and windy, and a big thing is that if you would be cleaning up something, you might be cleaning it up 20 minutes later if stuff is blowing in.
The company and the province maintain the spill was contained within hours of its discovery and claim there's no harm to community water supplies, and that the impact on wildlife also appears to be negligible, with the only confirmed casualty being a goose that was cleaned, then released.
We do hear anecdotal information, we do hear unconfirmed reports. Every time we go to check them out, they're not there. So we've had, we believe that there's been a beaver or two that might have been impacted, muskrat that swam away, but there's been very little stuff.
The company won't say how much it's already spent on cleanup or how much it stands to lose because of the leak. It's also facing disciplinary action from the Energy Resource Conservation Board, which could shut down the line permanently or kick the company out of Alberta.
That investigation is ongoing. We don't have any results from that will take time, but the results of that investigation will determine what kind of enforcement action might take place.
And Chris, we see dozens of people on the job trying to get rid of the oil, but we still don't know when they'll be done.
Yeah, so far nobody's saying how long it's going to take to finish cleaning all this oil up. Now, Alberta Environment says it's actually confident there's not going to be any long-term damage to the river here because it says it's a large rushing body of water. It naturally flushes itself out constantly. So it says within a few months, presumably the cleanup will be done and the effects won't go much beyond that. But there's still people living along the river, and we're still, you know, this boom is 30 kilometers from the site of the actual breach. People living along those shores have concerns about possible damage to their property. They're asking for compensation. The oil company actually says it's not ruling that out. It says once this is all done, it will look at those claims and deal with them on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, Chris, thank you. A couple of weeks ago, it looked like Gleniffer Lake would be closed for the long weekend and maybe even the whole summer after a pipeline leak upstream sent oil flowing into the reservoir. But this afternoon, people are putting their boats in the water, and Alberta Environment now says the lake is safe to use. Kevin Green reports.
Boaters on Gleniffer Lake are all smiles as they launch into the water and into the long weekend.
Especially for long weekends, it's great because tonight there's fireworks and we sit out in the boat to watch them and stuff. So to be able to get on the lake and be able to do that that's what makes our summer.
Only a few weeks ago, summer fun on this lake was on hold. In early June, a 46-year-old pipeline operated by Plains Midstream leaked up to 3,000 barrels of oil into the Red Deer River. Much of it flowed downstream to Gleniffer Lake. At the time, it threatened an end to summer for residents at Gleniffer Lake Resort. Cottage sales and rentals dried up.
The calls that we did get were concerns about, you know, they want to come out and rent. Can they use the lake? You know, people wondering if their property values will decrease.
Now hitting the water 3 weeks later, they say the cleanup has gone smoother and faster than expected.
Yeah, I'm just starting my vacation, so this means a lot to me to have the lake open again. I'm a constant water skier, play on the water all the time, so that's the most important thing to me.
And since Plains Midstream had to remove all the floating debris from the lake, they maintain it's actually safer than usual.
Probably safer now than in previous springs due to the fact that all the driftwood has been cleaned up and there's nothing floating out there.
Alberta Environment says hydrocarbon levels in the water have dropped to a point they can no longer be detected. Still, it advises people not to eat any fish caught in Gleniffer Lake. Kevin Green, CTV News, Calgary.
Plains Midstream says it still has over 300 people on site testing the water and cleaning the shoreline. When a pipeline owned by Plains Midstream leaked oil into the Red Deer River in June, the oil all flowed downstream, but the negative effects flowed upstream to the nearest town, Sundre. Businesses there are working hard to let people know it's business as usual. Kevin Green reports.
When a pipeline burst in June leaking oil into the Red Deer River, a lot of Albertans thought the town of Sundre was affected.
The problem is that Sundre, being the closest town to the spill, it gets in the reports as the name of where the spill was.
The pipeline leak happened several kilometers downstream from here. It didn't affect the town of Sundre, and it had no effect on this stretch of river running through the town. But the perception did have an effect on businesses here, especially the ones that make their living on or near the water.
Good afternoon, Otter Rafting.
Almost immediately after the pipeline leaked, the phone started ringing at Otter Rafting Adventures. Owner David Todd estimates sales in June were off about 10%.
People phoning, wondering if you could use the river, what damage was done. I had people wondering if they should continue with their plans.
Greenwood Campground is owned by the town of Sundre and managed by MERRILYN Gallagher.
We get a lot of calls wanting to know if indeed the campground is open, and no, we've never closed.
Businesses in Sundre are working hard to get the word out that it's business as usual.
So we still have great recreation properties. People can go camping, whitewater rafting, hiking all around the area here, and be miles and miles away from the site of the rupture.
Even downstream where the spill did happen, things are returning to normal. Alberta Environment says there's no detectable hydrocarbons in Gleniffer Lake, and water samples taken along the river fall within Alberta standards and pose no risk to health. Kevin Green, CTV News, Sundre.
Plains Midstream says it still has 214 staff cleaning up the banks of the Red Deer River downstream of that pipeline leak.